Hello, welcome back. Thanks for joining me again. It's been about a week since I recorded, and I am now, knock on wood, fully recovered from all the stuff that I was sick with. So I'm really happy, very fortunate that that is the case. So I wanted to give you a reading update and talk about a couple books that I picked up a couple weeks ago, probably at the thrift store, before I return a bunch of these things back to the library. And I have so many books that have come up all at once at the library from my holds. So what happens is I get a big book bag of books from the library, and then I start just dipping into them to figure out which ones that I'm keeping and that I'm really ready to read, and then the other ones go back. So we'll see. I'm really excited because they're just from all kinds of different genres. My little Suki is in this room with me, which she usually is not. So we'll see how that goes. Anyway, so let's get to it. What did I want to talk about first? Couple books I mentioned in the last video. One of them was Visitors by Anita Brookner, and this is a classic Anita Brookner. It was written in 1997. I don't know where that falls in her order of books, but it's probably pretty late in the game. And this is a story about Dorothea May. She's called Thea or Mrs. May. She's a widow. She got married really late in life, relatively late. And she married someone who had been married before, and he was a widow. And it centers around one of her, I think, relatives or husband's relatives whose daughter is getting married. And I think it's set in the 80s or 90s. And the couple is not as English proper as the parents and the family. So they want to do things a lot more casual, and the parents and the family want to do things proper. So that's a funny side story. But really the story is about Thea and how she enjoys being single, and how now she's being asked to take in someone who's a guest at the wedding. It's like the groom's best friend, Steve. And the book is just about her interaction with Steve. I never really figured out Steve. I felt sorry for Steve at times. I love to see how Thea changes her mind about him throughout the story, and how in some ways she doesn't change her mind. So it was really good. It's Brookner. I'll probably read, a couple Brookners a year because I just love being in that space. I also talked about Also a Poet, which is a memoir by Ada Cahoun, who is the daughter of a writer from the 60s. Peter, I can't pronounce this name, Sheldall. There's a J in there though. I don't know if it's silent. And he was friends with Frank O'Hara, the poet, who I don't know, but some people I'm connected with on Bookstagram know him very well. He wrote the book called like Lunch Poems or something, which is supposed to be really funny. So she gets some cassette tapes from her dad. Her dad was going to write a biography about Frank O'Hara, and he never did because he couldn't get letters from Frank O'Hara's sister. This is after Frank died in the 60s. And like in the 70s, he was going to write this biography. So she gets the cassette tapes of all these interviews of Frank O'Hara's friends, and her dad is not a very nice guy. He's grumpy. He's not nice to her. He's not complimentary. It's kind of weird, but it's some of it's generational, but still, that annoyed me. I loved the 60s scene in New York City, in the East Village. I loved all that. Frank O'Hara is bumping elbows and hanging out with de Kooning and somebody else. I can't remember. So all of that was fun, but what really starts to surface is the relationship between Ada and her father, and what happens throughout her research of Frank O'Hara's friends, and her trying to get permission from Frank O'Hara's sister, Maureen, to see the letters. And does she give her access? How does she give her access? I really ended up enjoying it in the end. I almost stopped reading it, and then I just kept going because it was just this like filler book I was reading anyway. So yeah. Oh, Caledonia, I finished. I don't know if I was finished when I talked about it, but I don't think I was. I love this book. I really felt sorry for Janet. I was like a little tense through the whole book because I knew she died. And I found myself the whole time trying to figure out why would someone kill her? It's clear from the beginning it's a murder. That's how the book starts. So I was a little tense, but I love the writing. It's funny if you take away the fact that she's murdered, because the book isn't about the murder, it's about Janet's life. And it's so endearing, and Janet's such unfortunately, in the place that she's at in her life, she's a misfit and people blame her for things, and so I loved it. But I don't know why there was a murder. I don't understand. Anyway. And I am involved in a year-long read-along through Simon at Footnotes and Tangents. That's his handle in Bookstagram. And so me and like 800 other people are reading a chapter a day. Today is January 6th, but I'm on chapter 9 because I got a little eager in the beginning. I'm taking like short notes about every chapter. I read it first thing in the morning, which I'm loving. I love the characters. I am absolutely loving War and Peace right now. So I'm going to read chapter 10 tomorrow. I love doing this every day. I love breaking it up into chunks. And I'll probably at times read ahead, especially when I know like I'm going on vacation or something, because I'm not taking this with me anywhere. That's for sure. So that is that. And I am just so happy. All right. I just wanted to talk about a couple books that I found in the Goodwill store, which here in the US is where I go as a thrift store. Excuse me. And what do I look for in Goodwill? First of all, the books are like $1.29 or $2.29. If I go on Mondays at lunchtime, because I'm over 55, I get, I think it's 25% discount on anything you buy. So it's even cheaper. The books are even cheaper. It's crazy. So, I'd say like every 2 months, I go over there and just look at stuff. What I'm looking for is classics, unless there is a contemporary fiction book or nonfiction that is on my list. Like that's something I've been wanting to read and I see it there, I might pick it up, but I'm more than likely not going to, because I'll probably just get it from the library. I get most contemporary fiction from the library. So, yeah, it's classics. And you wouldn't believe how many classics are there. That's how I've built up most of my classics library, is just by finding them in Goodwill. So whoever's feeding that Goodwill store those books, I'm just very, very fortunate. This is not a classic, but I found a George Saunders at Goodwill. I have never read a George Saunders. I will probably not read, is it Lincoln in the Bardo? I opened that book up in the library and I could just tell it's not for me. But this is short stories, the 10th of December. I've heard it talked about. People that love George Saunders love this. And it actually says it was voted one of the 10 best books by the New York Times in 2013. I'm not a big short story reader, so I don't know how I'm going to get along with this, but I'm really glad I have it. Then, something I am meaning to read, and now I've picked it up, is The Awakening by Kate Chopin. I listened to an episode of Backlisted, one of my favorite book podcasts, and I loved the episode on The Awakening. They don't give things away. They don't talk about the whole story from beginning to end. And if there is going to be a spoiler, they tell you so you can skip ahead. So I know just enough about the story to be really enticed. And it's short. Well, relatively short, under 200 pages, and the pages are tiny. And I found Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, another book that I know I want to read, and there it was, and 25% off, even more of a cheap price, whether it was $1 or $2. So I'm really happy I got that. Building up the classics, one thrift store book at a time is what I'm doing. So I have a lot of books on hold, and I will let you know what those are. There's a book that I have on my shelf that someone in Bookstagram is reading, and I really meant to get to it last year, and I never did. It is a classic. It was written, I'm not even going to guess when it's written, but it's contemporary classic. Maybe it was written in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s. I don't know. But it is a classic. I'm not going to tell you what it is because I might not end up reading it right now. I'm going to dip into it, see if I feel like I'm going to read it now. It's a pretty large book. I bought it used, which is how I buy 99.9% of my books, maybe 100%. I can't even think of when I bought a new book. But anyway, that's it for now. Thanks for hanging in there. I really appreciate it. If you have anything to tell me about any of your reading experiences. Oh, I'm forgetting something. Oh my gosh. How could I forget this? This is what I'm currently reading. All right. And Annie Ernaux. This is my second Annie Ernaux. I read The Happening or Happenings, her slim memoir about something traumatic that happened to her in the 1970s. I don't know if it tells you on the blurb what it was, so I'm not going to tell you what it was here. But my gosh, I love that book. It's a traumatic story, but it's written by an excellent writer, which makes it so wonderful to read. It's a wonderful reading experience. It's a tough experience for her in the 70s, but it's so well written. You get a real sense of how things were in, I guess it's London in the 70s. Real sense of politics and opinions and right and wrong, the morals of the time, things like that. So I really recommend that. This is another memoir called The Years. It was written in 2008 in France, and it's won, it says the Nobel Prize 2022. So is this a book that just won the Nobel Prize? I'm so ashamed I don't know that. But let's assume it is because the sticker is on it. This, I started reading right around Christmas, and I put it down and thought, I'm just returning this to the library. I don't get it. I don't like the style. But I picked it back up before I returned it because now I'm like speed reading it, or I'm just reading it a lot, I should say. And it says it is a personal narrative of the period 1941 to 2006, told through the lens of memory. But it's done using a style I've never read before, which is she uses the style that is, instead of saying I, she uses we through the whole book. And I love that. Now, at first I didn't like it. I wasn't really understanding what was going on. she uses we, and then sometimes she uses one, like one would do this or one would do that. And then other times she's talking about a specific woman and she says she or her in whatever blurb or memory she's talking about from the 40s or 50s or 60s. So maybe it's politics, maybe it's music, maybe it's teenage years, maybe it's college years, and it has to do with relationships, something like that. Maybe it has to do with commercialism, consumerism, it's a better word. But so she goes back and forth using those words, using those perspectives. And I guess at first I just wasn't getting it and I didn't like it. But now I love it. So I highly recommend this. It is very different than any memoir I've ever read. It's a history book of its time in France. It's a memoir, but it's nothing like you've ever read before because you get a sense that it's the collective of her generation. So I'm loving it. Anyway, thanks for hanging in there, and please leave any comments about any of the books that I've mentioned and what your reading experience has been. And also, if you are one of those people that are in the War and Peace read along, I would love to know that too. So I hope you have a good week. Thanks for listening.